As the icy grasp of winter descended over Europe in the waning weeks of 1944, the earth-shattering battles rattling the continent began to lose momentum. After their awe-inspiring breakout from Normandy, the Allies were beginning to settle in near the German border. The Wehrmacht, weakened and demoralized like a vanquished beast, struggled to rise from its knees. For the Allies, triumph in Europe loomed closely, only a matter of time. Yet there was one man whose fury should never be underestimated: Adolf Hitler. Disregarding the counsel of his advisors to muster his troops for the defense of Germany, the Führer resolved to unleash one final devastating German offensive in World War II. December 15th dawned, and the unsuspecting Allied troops were about to be caught entirely off guard. It was only just the day before that 21st Army Group Commander Bernard Montgomery had confidently proclaimed, quote, "The inadequacies of German manpower, equipment and resources preclude any offensive action on their part." The young Allied recruits had been lulled into a false sense of security, but their world was about to unravel. Like a storm of thunder and wrath, a surprise German force was to bear down upon the US troops. The sheer might and numbers of the Germans would be so staggering they seemed to have materialized from thin air. This new blitzkrieg was to be a relentless assault, and the unyielding German bulge it produced would consume the Ardennes as the American front line was shattered. Still, amidst the chaos, a beacon of defiance emerged. Deep within the frozen woodlands of Belgium's Lanzarath Ridge, Lyle Book Jr. and his band of 18 men refused to yield. Together, these fearless American warriors would need to hold their ground against an entire battalion of over 500 German soldiers. If successful, their actions could single-handedly threaten to unravel Hitler's plans. It would send ripples that would reverberate throughout the remainder of the war. In the aftermath of the crushing German defeat at Stalingrad on February 2, 1943, the advance of the Red Army seemed unstoppable. The Soviets, with their seemingly unending stock of manpower and their thirst for retribution, bore down relentlessly. Towards the end of 1944, Hitler was forced to concede that Berlin would soon succumb to this Soviet onslaught, unless, by some stroke of strategic genius, German forces on the Western Front could be redirected to defend the East. However, the situation in the West was scarcely less dire. The formidable Western Allies were poised at the very doorstep of Germany, having executed a masterful breakout from Normandy. Yet in Hitler's mind, these forces were more susceptible to fracture than the monolithic Red Army. The German dictator perceived the alliance between Britain and the US as tenuous, convinced that a single decisive blow could sever the fragile bond between them and coax America into negotiating a peace settlement. This would, in turn, enable Germany to concentrate its remaining forces on repelling the Soviet threat. But the odds were stacked against Germany. Depleted strategic resources, a dwindling pool of manpower, and battered equipment made launching a sudden offensive strike all the more challenging. It would demand the total, unreserved commitment of every remaining German soldier on the Western Front. The battle plan was clear. Hitler would resurrect the tactics that had served him well 4 years earlier, unleashing a lightning-fast assault through the Ardennes with his most formidable formation, the 6th Panzer Army. The German forces would puncture the US lines in the Ardennes, ford the River Meuse, and then capture the city of Antwerp, cleaving the Allied front and forcing the Allies into a similar situation to that of the evacuation at Dunkirk. The daring gambit teetered on a razor's edge. The Germans could deliver a crushing, humiliating blow to the Allies, forcing them to re-evaluate their commitment to the war. Or they could completely squander the Wehrmacht's last remnants of strength, leaving them vulnerable to an unstoppable Allied invasion of Germany. Hitler didn't hesitate or toy with the idea of adopting a defensive posture. With all chips on the table, he unleashed the fierce Ardennes offensive. The Allies would know it as the Battle of the Bulge. The element of surprise was paramount for the success of the Ardennes offensive. The Allies needed to be convinced that the Germans were incapable of launching an attack for it to be successful. To achieve this, the German military mobilized hundreds of thousands of men who stealthily traversed the forests under the cloak of darkness. By day, they concealed themselves in local villages and towns, stowing their vehicles in barns or camouflaging them with foliage. Allied warplanes scouring the countryside would see no evidence of a burgeoning enemy force. Unbeknownst to the German soldiers, they were pawns in a top-secret operation, the details of which were withheld from even the regimental commanders until the 11th hour. Only the uppermost echelon of the German command was aware of the offensive, and even then, numerous high-ranking officers counseled Hitler to devote what remained of their troops and resources to Germany's defense. But by this time in the war, Hitler had long ago stopped pretending to listen to his generals and dismissed his advisors' concerns. As the principal attack force covertly assembled, Otto Skorzeny, German SS commando and the man responsible for rescuing Benito Mussolini a year prior, led a covert group behind enemy lines, disguised as US and British soldiers in Operation Greif. The English-speaking German agents wreaked havoc on the Allies, sabotaging supply lines, communications facilities and signposts, misdirecting traffic and sowing confusion in the crucial hours preceding the attack. The group even managed to divert an entire Allied regiment off course. Simultaneously, another special operations group executed Operation Stosser, a daring nighttime paratroop drop behind Allied lines to capture a vital road junction near Malmedy in Belgium. The secrecy of the overall German deployment proved wildly successful in tricking the Allies into a false sense of security, and the Allies never quite connected the dots of the German special operations. Such a rapid mobilization under strained conditions pushed the Wehrmacht supply lines to the breaking point, but it was now or never. As German forces, both within and beyond the Allied lines, readied themselves for the onslaught, the unsuspecting American and British troops remained oblivious to the imminent storm. On the morning of December 16, 1944, the German army was given the go-ahead to unleash what it hoped would be a final, devastating blitzkrieg upon Europe. In the early hours of December 16th, the dreaded 6th Panzer Army, commanded by the infamous Sepp Dietrich, launched a vicious and unanticipated attack against US positions. The assault caught countless American fighters off guard, still in their tents, desperately scrambling to grab their rifles and equipment as German tanks mercilessly overwhelmed their positions. Defying Hitler's orders to initiate the attack with a colossal artillery barrage, Hasso von Manteuffel and the 5th Panzer Army opted for a stealthier approach, silently crossing the Sauer River to surprise the slumbering Americans. The abrupt and brutal onslaught sent many newer US recruits into a state of sheer panic. Some fled in abject terror, while others, according to reports, were reduced to cowering in fear. In an instant, the front lines along the Ardennes had been transformed into a feverish nightmare for the woefully unprepared Allies. The Germans achieved immediate and resounding victories, smashing one Allied position after another and skillfully penetrating deep into French and Belgian territory. This rapid advance, covering nearly 60 miles in the first few days, gave rise to the infamous German bulge in the front lines, signaling the onset of an arduous and harrowing struggle for all involved. However, not all Allied combatants were fresh to the front, and not all succumbed to fear. Amid the chaos and destruction, a select few American soldiers demonstrated unwavering courage and resilience. In the ensuing hours, their extraordinary bravery and determination would earn them an enduring place in the annals of history. The 18 American servicemen of the 394th Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon were an elite, albeit somewhat inexperienced, cadre deployed to the treacherous Ardennes. Among them were college-educated graduates of the now-defunct Army Specialized Training Program, which had prepared future personnel in engineering, foreign languages, and medicine. Commanding the platoon was one of the youngest officers in the entire army, the 20-year-old prodigy, Lieutenant Lyle Book. Comprising 2 reconnaissance squads, each with 9 men, the platoon was highly trained for surveillance efforts, but ill-equipped for direct engagement with the Germans. Their primary objective was to act as a specialized intelligence unit, collecting information on enemy coordinates and size and relaying it to the regimental intelligence officer. They operated patrol vehicles and observation posts and coordinated intelligence activities across the regiment to accomplish this. Stationed in a brick building in Hunningen in Belgium near the German border, they utilized the basement as a storage facility for military combat rations. On the fateful morning of December 16th, the two squadrons detected a formidable German advance in the neighboring town. The Americans were effectively cut off, with communications to higher headquarters severely disrupted and additional support nowhere in sight. At the time, most American forces in the area were assaulting the Siegfried Line through Wallerschild, a mere 5 miles north of the platoon's position. Although they anticipated a counterattack, the sheer magnitude of the German force far exceeded their wildest expectations. Previous reports by the military brass had depicted the Wehrmacht as being in shambles. As the vast horde marched toward the US lines, the GIs could not understand where the massive formations had come from. Undaunted, Lieutenant Buch and his team resolved to establish fortifications at Lanzarath, atop a hill nestled on the forest's edge, overlooking a vast expanse of pasture. Capitalizing on the remnants of foxholes left by a previous unit, they dug deeper, enlarging the spaces to accommodate additional soldiers. Concealed beneath pine logs, their position commanded a 300-yard stretch of the ridgeline to the northeast. It afforded them a clear vantage point over the fork in the road to their left. As snow fell, the Americans seamlessly blended into their surroundings, hidden from the prying eyes of the enemy below. They utilized a nearby log hut as a warming shelter and armed themselves with an impressive arsenal secured by Buch, which included additional carbines, automatic rifles, and a light machine gun. A .50 caliber machine gun mounted on a jeep, also obtained through Buch's ingenuity, completed their brawny cache. The platoon meticulously positioned the jeep, ensuring it held a strategic advantage over the road. With hourly jeep patrols to maintain contact between the flanks and monitor enemy movements, the team that had been intended to serve as the eyes and ears of the 394th Infantry Regiment was thrust into a role for which they were scarcely prepared. Their new and sole directive was to hold the area at all costs, and they clung to the hope that reinforcements would soon arrive. Buch would later recount in an interview, quote, "We weren't trained to occupy a defensive position in the front lines. We were trained to patrol and get information about the enemy. Yet, they would now have to go above and beyond." As the Americans braced for the onslaught, on the other side of the battlefield, the German 9th Regiment prepared to accomplish their mission, to spearhead the advance of the 6th Panzer Army by assaulting the village of Lanzarath and razing it to the ground. German commanders wanted to save their available armor vehicles for tougher battles ahead. They deemed the infantry of the 9th Regiment more than capable of taking the small village that stood in their way and weeding out any isolated American units in the area. By that point in the war, most German units were composed of a mix of seasoned veterans and a large number of untested young men who had barely any experience with firearms. During the invasion of Normandy, the German 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, known for its effectiveness in combat, was severely depleted. It had been rebuilt with members from Luftwaffe field regiments to maintain German morale. These new recruits were equipped with the advanced STG-44 selective fire rifle, rifle grenades, and various other armaments. However, they were still green, and thanks to Nazi Germany's unwavering propaganda machine, under the impression that the American soldiers were highly demoralized and unwilling to put up a fight. From this reformed 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division, the 9th Regiment was tasked with leading the attack on Lanzerath and clearing the village. They would then proceed to attack the towns of Honsfeld and Bullingen, where they believed they would face the bulk of the US troops. The 6th Panzer Army, spearheaded by Kampfgruppe Piper, was to follow up immediately, attacking the route by Losheimer Graben directly after Lanzerath had been taken. Despite Germany's recent losses and the fact that they were being crushed by foreign armies on two fronts, the morale of these German servicemen remained strong. They saw themselves as the ultimate defense of their homeland and were prepared to fight tooth and nail to protect it. The letters the German soldiers wrote home at the time revealed a surprising sense of optimism and determination. They believed victory was possible and perceived their advance as unstoppable. The German forces advanced through the heavily wooded areas. The 500 men from the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment and 50 from the Fusilier Regiment marched, utterly unaware of the tiny American platoon about to make their lives a living hell. As the 9th Regiment advanced toward the outnumbered American platoon, they knew the might of the forces that marched behind them. Over 500,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, and 2,400 warplanes were now moving to unleash the wrath of the Third Reich one last time. In years, most German troops had not seen a German offensive of such scope. They were intoxicated by the idea that this was the moment for them to turn the tide of the war in their favor and continue the dream of the 1,000-year Reich. Little did they know that they were about to be punished by fewer than 24 American soldiers. The ominous rumble of a 2-hour-long rolling barrage signaled the beginning of the attack. Huddled in their foxholes, the I and R platoon braced for impact, gritting their teeth as the earth trembled beneath them. Miraculously, the foxholes provided just enough protection, and the platoon emerged mostly unscathed. However, their reprieve was short-lived, as they discovered the German soldiers had cut their landlines, leaving them isolated and unable to call for backup. Desperate for information, the regiment radioed orders for the platoon to hold their position and send out a patrol. As the patrol crept through the shattered landscape, they watched in horror as a massive German infantry formation advanced under the glow of giant searchlights near Losheim. As dawn broke, Bork spotted a long column of around 500 German troops marching towards them. 18 men against 500. It was ludicrous, and Buch contacted regimental headquarters to request permission to withdraw and engage in a delaying action. However, he was instructed to hold their position at all costs and wait for reinforcements from the 3rd Battalion. German soldiers continued to advance, and Buch sent some of his men to assist in various defensive and observational positions. Skirmishes erupted around the village, with the American soldiers engaging in close combat with the advancing German forces. The passionate German troopers were highly inexperienced and overconfident, and soon their reckless zeal would make them pay. In one instance, Krieger, an American soldier, single-handedly engaged and neutralized most of a German platoon by himself using the .50 caliber gun mounted on the jeep. At their ridgetop position, Bork and his platoon prepared to surprise the German forces as they advanced. However, a young girl from the village unknowingly alerted the Germans to the Americans' presence. The Germans immediately took cover, and a fierce firefight ensued between the outnumbered American platoon and the advancing German infantry. Discovered and significantly outgunned, the Americans dug into their reinforced positions. They placed their hopes on their experience and the rehearsed routine they had meticulously devised. As the freezing skirmish devolved into one blistering gust of bullets after another, the American soldiers were taken aback by the inexperienced tactics employed by the German troops as they charged head-on and bunched together in the open. Some of the Americans would later claim it was similar to, quote, shooting clay ducks in California at an amusement park. Several Germans were cut down trying to climb over the 4-feet-high barbed wire fence that divided the field. Germans littered the snow as their casualties mounted. The Americans allowed German medics to remove the wounded under a white flag, but they soon resumed fire after noticing suspicious activity. The American platoon fiercely defended their position throughout the day, inflicting humiliating losses on the German forces. The deep foxholes and the heavy snow that had fallen during the night made the American position mostly invisible to the Germans. They knew where the fire was coming from, but could not effectively strike back. Lieutenant Buch was determined to fight to the last bullet, even as the ominous threat of the 1st SS Panzer Division loomed. But the enemy's relentless fire eventually took its toll, obliterating the I and R platoon's radio and severing their last lifeline to the outside world. As dusk drew near within the war-torn frozen forests of the Ardennes, with their own ammunition supplies dwindling and unable to contact regimental headquarters for further instructions, the American fighters realized they would probably not make it out alive from Lanzarath Ridge. Slowly and painfully, the German soldiers began to adapt. They switched from total frontal attacks to covering maneuvers along the roadside ditches, their rifles trained on the American foxholes. The air exploded with the deafening roar of gunfire as both sides exchanged a hail of bullets. Each bullet fired from an American gun left the defenders more and more concerned as their supplies declined. The Germans launched assault after assault, their frustration mounting as the snow-blanketed American platoon remained all but invisible. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Americans' superior defensive position wreaked havoc on the Fallschirmjäger regiment. The harrowing firefight between the 18 men and the group of over 500 raged on for hours. It repelled 3 concerted assaults as the air grew thick with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder spread across the battlefield. When the third wave of attacks had been beaten back, hundreds of Germans were left scattered over the dirty snow. At the same time, only 1 American soldier had been wounded. Yet despite their legendary triumph, the platoon knew they couldn't hold out much longer. As Buch later recounted in an interview with the New York Times, quote, "We were frightened and we were tired, and it was like a hellish nightmare. It seemed it would never end. We couldn't get any help. It seemed like it was all hopeless." Exhausted, freezing and dangerously low on ammunition, Lieutenant Buch desperately attempted to seek reinforcements or a formal withdrawal order. However, just as Buch was about to signal a fighting retreat, the Germans outsmarted the tiny American platoon by flanking them, penetrating their lines and overrunning their foxholes. But even in victory, the German losses did not stop. As they seized the ridge, several attackers were taken out by grenades rigged to wires and triggered by hidden American fighters. Unexpectedly, the Germans didn't put down the defenders where they laid. Instead, Buch was dragged out of his position by a German officer with a machine gun. Surely there must be hundreds of other American soldiers, and the Germans wanted to know where they were. Having no answer, Buch knew his life was over when the officer placed the weapon against his back and pulled the trigger. But then, almost miraculously, the gun clicked. It was out of ammunition. At that moment, Buch and the German officer were hit by bullets. The German officer was seriously wounded, while Buch suffered a wound in his calf. Taking over the scene, German Sergeant Vince Kuhlbach then grabbed Buch and questioned who was in command. When Buch replied that he was, Kuhlbach could scarcely believe that the young American had led the defensive effort with only 18 men. As he and his men were taken away, Lieutenant Buch had no idea what they had just done. At the moment, their capture seemed like a crushing defeat, and he would bitterly blame himself for not retreating sooner and allowing his men to be captured. The fate before them was as dark as their last stand on Lanzerath Ridge. The I and R platoon members who could walk were sent to Germany, while the seriously wounded were loaded onto trucks and eventually put on trains. Buch crammed into a single railroad cattle car with 71 other POWs, traveled for days without food or water. By Christmas, 7 men in Buch's car had perished, and the rest clung to life by the thinnest thread. The prisoners were transported to hospitals in Frankfurt and Hanover before being imprisoned in a POW camp. When Task Force Baum from Patton's 4th Armored Division tried to liberate the camp, Captain A. Baum was surprised by the large number of prisoners and could not rescue them all. During the attempt, most of Baum's unit was captured, and Buch was recaptured, only to be released 1 week before the war ended. Weak, drained, and on the verge of delirium after enduring so much suffering, Buch would have to be hospitalized for months after the war. Even then, he didn't believe his men had accomplished anything extraordinary. He reflected, quote, "We were in those foxholes, and what we did was to defend ourselves and try to live through it." As the months became years and the final days of World War II were properly explored, Buch realized the importance of their actions that fateful day. He learned that they had actually held back an entire element of the 1st Battalion, 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, 3rd Fallschirmjäger Division of about 500 men. By doing so, the tiny American force managed to throw a wrench into the 6th Panzer Army's march toward Antwerp, reshaping the destiny of one of the war's most pivotal and protracted battles. At 4:30 a.m. on December 17th, more than 18 hours behind schedule, the 1st SS Panzer Division finally left Lanzarath and drove northwest for Buchholz Station. The entire timetable of the German advance on the River Meuse and Antwerp had been severely crippled, allowing the Americans precious hours to move in reinforcements. This delay proved to be crucial in the overall outcome of the Battle of the Bulge, as it provided the Allies with the necessary time to regroup and counter the German offensive. It would take years to achieve the recognition they deserved, but every veteran from Lanzarath Ridge was eventually awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. 4 received the Distinguished Service Cross, 5 the Silver Star, and 9 the Bronze Star, with V device for their 10-hour ordeal against a 500-man German battalion. Their names etched in the passages of history, Buch's platoon would forever be remembered as the most decorated unit of its size in all of World War II.